Support for My Week, live from the Mackinac Policy Conference, is brought to you by Masco Corporation Foundation, DTE Energy Foundation, ITC Holdings Corporation, the Shirley and Bill Fox Fund, Business Leaders for Michigan, and by Delta. From the moment you wake up until you turn out the light, Masco is proud to be part of your everyday life. When you turn on your Delta faucet for a cool drink of water, open a Craft-Made or Marilat kitchen cabinet to set the family table, or freshen up a room with a new coat of Behr paint, we're there with you. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. At DTE Energy, we work hard to take care of the land, water, and living creatures within our communities. DTE Energy works to maintain thousands of acres of land in their natural state and preserve habitats for hundreds of species. Our company has set aside hundreds of acres of wildlife. Our employees have volunteered thousands of hours, and the DTE Energy Foundation has donated millions of dollars to environmental programs. DTE Energy, committed to a clean, green future.
ITC operates, builds, and maintains the electric transmission infrastructure. We are working hard to improve electric reliability and increase electric transmission capacity throughout our operations across the Midwest. ITC, we're your energy superhighway.
Good Friday morning to you. I'm Christy McDonald. It is the final day of the Mackinac Policy Conference, and we have a series of mini sessions for you. This morning's sessions are promising to be disruptive and interactive, featuring some good-natured banter between thought leaders with opposing viewpoints who will probably say really what's on their minds, and that's going to create some headlines for weeks to come. We'll get quick overviews of topics, including predicting the gubernatorial election. Our own Nolan Finley will take a look at the urban-rural divide. Then Stephen Henderson leads a panel on ballot issues, and many more topics will be covered in quick 15-minute discussions. So now let's head over to the other side of the parlor here at the Grand Hotel, where the president of Archer Corporate Services, Dennis Archer Jr., and the chief operating officer of the Detroit Regional Chamber, Tammy Carnrike, are kicking off the session. Morning View, Mackinac Uncensored.
Good morning, and welcome to Morning View, Mackinac Uncensored. We welcome all of you who are joining us here in the lobby. You must not have been at the Mustang or the Pink Pony last night. Either that or you had a Bloody Mary this morning. But this is our second year of wishing you a safe travel home, providing you with some coffee and some snacks as you hit the road and check out of the Grand Hotel. And we do a debrief of the past 3 days of the Mackinac Policy Conference, which I think, Tammy, was incredible.
I think we had a great week. I mean, we had such great content, fabulous speakers, and everyone, you can go online and still see all of that great content and speakers.
What thinking back of the highlights from my perspective, I love how Devin brought out the Bloody Marys.
For Speaker Boehner.
Speaker Boehner was incredible. I also thought that the debate that Brad Williams and his team put together yesterday, given that they had 6 people from 2 different parties, was a great introduction to the candidates.
I think you're absolutely right, and it's a great way to kick off this morning, don't you think?
Absolutely. And so our first subject matter is something that's near and dear to me because it talks about do business people have a political party, particularly in the state of Michigan as we lead into this August primary and November general election. And we've got a phenomenal panel that's here with Ron, Lindsay, and Dennis. And so with no further ado, should we pass it to them?
Take it away, Lindsay.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Hi, everyone. I am Lindsay VanHulle. I am a state government reporter for Bridge Magazine in Lansing. I'm here with Dennis Cowan, a partner at the Plunkett Cooney law firm in Bloomfield Hills, and Ron Hall, president and CEO of Bridgewater Interiors. We're going to be talking today about the question, does business have a political party? We've got about 15 minutes, so let's jump right in.
Great.
All right. So when people think of the Republican Party, it's fair to say, people sort of associate that with as the party of business. Do you guys, is that still the case? Do you think, given where we are today, that that's still a fair association?
Well, full disclosure, I'm a former mayor of Royal Oak, and I was also the chairman of the Oakland County Republican Party, so I'll make the case that the Republican Party still is the party of business. Certainly we have a governor here who's a businessman. We have a legislature that's worked very hard to reduce the tax burden and also the regulatory burden here in the state to give a level playing field for both large and small businesses. At the federal level, we just had tax cuts, which will help business, and I think we started to see the effect of that with more hiring and sharing of bonuses, as well as deregulation. And our president, President Trump, is a businessman. So I would make the case that we still have a strong alliance with business and the Republican Party. Does it need, there's always room for improvement, but I think over the test of time and even today, that's the case.
Ron, what about you?
I have a little bit different view. I won't surprise you. I think that it is less true than it used to be that the Republican Party is clearly the party of business. One of the things we have talked a lot at this conference and heard from the stage several times about how business people have much more in common in our alignment on views with issues facing the state than those on which we disagree. And I agree that we need to be focusing on the things that we all agree on, because as we heard Tanya Allen say eloquently yesterday, that's 70% of what's going on. I know that the business community in the last few years is increasingly leaning in on issues that have more traditionally been associated as being championed by the Democratic Party. I know that Democratic Party candidates and elected officials are at the forefront of talking with business leaders about what's important to bring the region back for everyone. And business people are understanding that we've all got to get in some more common boats if we're going to row the entire effort forward.
And what's interesting is that we've seen this shift in the Republican Party and really in both parties toward kind of the poles, the extremes, the far left or the far right. And that polarization really started before the election in 2016. But what do you think is causing it, and where does that really leave business?
Well, the reality is business has to navigate through whichever party is in power at whatever level. I work with businesses at the local, state, and federal level, and whether their leanings are Democrat or Republican doesn't matter. What we need to do is navigate through the system. And you find different variations. You may have a local town that's more Democratic leaning, and you have to make the case for your project or your business or whatever you're going to do. So I think business tends to have to navigate those waters even if things are polarized. What they try to do is find a common background or a common theme so that they can move their business forward in the community or in the state.
Yeah, I mostly agree with that. I think that there's a huge opportunity for the business community to be a moderating influence on the extremes of debate, and I think that's a good thing. I think that moderation is a good thing as we seek consensus on the issues that have to be resolved to move the entire region forward. And this sense I get from business people is it feels increasingly lonely in the middle. And I think that's exactly why you see the business community stepping up more and more. I think that's highlighted by the agenda of this conference, to engage, because we recognize that again, we're all in this together, and we've all got to get to some consensus so that we can move forward.
And just to add to what Ron had to say, look, business leaders are problem solvers, and I think it's important that the businesses, and we've done it at this conference, tell the elected officials what we need, whether it's in regional transportation, education. We need to tell the elected leaders what we need and then have to really strongly advocate for it. Because at the end of the day, sometimes government takes a little bit longer to get there, but the reality is today, in the business world and in the economies, in the global economy, we don't have time to waste anymore. We have to get to it and get it done. Well,
and it's often, sort of seen that, that there's that tension almost between how fast, the speed of business and the speed of government, that sometimes, business and technology move faster than government and policy can keep up. When we think about what business wants today, there's always kind of the standard argument, tax policy, regulatory policy. But, we've heard a lot this week at the conference about, the need for education reform, the need for talent initiatives, the need for transit that can connect our regions. How has that kind of conversation evolved, certainly under the last 7 years of the governor's administration, but also looking forward into the future about the kinds of things that business is really going to need state policymakers to lead on?
I think there is an increased appreciation for the regionalism that is necessary to move us forward. And I think some of that's probably lessons learned from the recession and the climb back. I think some of that is some of the unique challenges we face now as we see, for example, that the state has fallen farther behind the median in education achievement, and business community has begun to feel that in the labor workforce as we try to, acquire the right talent to move our businesses forward. I just think that that's the name of the game. I just keep coming back to we've all got to get in the boat, work on the issues that we know exist together, and press. And I think, to your point, Dennis, that business leaders are good at that, solving those kinds of problems and helping elected leaders understand that, we understand that you have a lot going on that might not be directly on the business agenda, but indirectly it all matters, and you've got to be able to prioritize the core issues that are necessary to move the region forward.
And a classic case is what we talked about at the conference this week, the whole mobility world. And that is coming fast and furious. And I'm pleased to see that in the Michigan legislature, they are working closely with business to have the correct legislation and laws that will facilitate, as well as appropriations and for the mobility center and things of that nature. So that's encouraging, but this is coming fast and furious, and our competitors around the world are not going to wait. So we have to really educate the legislature and those at the federal level, our Congress people, to understand what Michigan needs to remain very competitive in this mobility technology world that we're entering into.
In your view, what is necessary right now to make Michigan competitive from a business standpoint? People, like we talked earlier, the tax and regulatory side came up a lot, I think, but we've seen a lot of movement in that area over the last 8 years. And so, what's the top issue now? For you, what's the biggest priority?
Well, for Ron has got a business, and I know he'll talk about this, but the number one issue is workers. And talent. I deal a lot in the world of getting projects approved. I've got clients with 10 construction projects right now. Every one is behind schedule. There's not enough skilled trades. Whether it's in the factory or out in the construction trades, we need talented workers. So that is the number one, I think, issue for business right now.
I agree with that, and I would also say, probably second would be consistency from local and state levels of government. One thing that businesses hate is unpredictability. I make business plans today for 3 and 5 and 8 years from now. I need to have a sense for what I can count on in terms of what infrastructure improvements are coming, what's going to be changing, if anything, with the tax and regulatory structure, and so on. And so I think that the more we have elected officials on the same page with business firms and job creators in terms of, again, what the priorities are. These are the things we're going to try to fund. These are the things that are going to have to wait. These are the tough choices we're going to make. Even if we don't have all of the details on some of that planning, I think that directionally, it's very comforting for the business community. You talk about wanting to attract investment, get more companies to come, being able to retain companies. That kind of tone is very important.
And just to add, the infrastructure of the state. I hate to bring up the sore topic of roads, but we move our products. We're a product-driven state, and we move our products on the road and the raw materials, as well as the boats that go here through the under Mackinac Bridge. But so that is a really key issue, and we've got to get about solving that problem also for business.
You know, when we talk about certainty and predictability, I mean, that certainly is key from a business standpoint. You know, we're at the end of a governorship. You know, that kind of transition in administration is natural and normal. But as you're looking at the governor's race, you know, this year in particular, and you know, the change in the legislature as well, when you look, thinking it through it, you know, thinking about it through that certainty, that predictability lens, what do you look for, I guess, in candidates or in a party that, you know, to make the case now to these candidates about the kinds of things that are really important to you, to ensure that kind of transition goes seamlessly so that there's not that upheaval and uncertainty about, you know, how things are going to be?
I really want to see the state maintain the course on dealing with some of the tough issues. We're finally talking about and getting to some meaningful pension funding reform. We are talking about putting more money in the classrooms for teachers. We have begun to fund the roads there and other infrastructure. There's still a long way to go. This is, of course, a state policy conference, but I think there's a lot of discussion to be had about additional assistance that needs to come from the federal government. We were talking earlier about education and the funding gaps for special education, despite the federal mandate for that, for example. Matching funds that are available for transit that we can't get to because we can't stop squabbling among ourselves. I think we need to see the state continue to press ahead on those issues. I am a big fan of fiscal responsibility, and I think that, you know, whether you agree with all of his policies or not, I think that the governor is to be, and again, full disclosure, I am one of the governor's appointees to a government commission. But I think there's a lot to be said for the budgeting process that's been brought to the state, and the multiple year look-aheads and the coming in on budget year after year. We're seeing that in Wayne County from Mr. Evans. We're seeing that in the city with Mayor Duggan. And I think that kind of fiscally responsible leadership at all levels, Democrat and Republican, is critical if we're going to continue to ride this wave forward.
I agree 100%. Governor Schneider did the job he was asked to do by the voters in Michigan. He laid out what he was going to do. He moved forward. He got it done with the legislature, working hand in hand. And I think that's really important. We need to have the next governor, whoever it is, needs to have a good working relationship with the legislature. We could have a split. You know, we could have Democrats in charge of one house or the other, and we don't know what party the new governor is going to be from. But the point is, Governor Schneider has set the stage. The next governor has to continue the improvement for the benefit of business and citizens here in the state of Michigan.
Well, we've got to wrap up soon, but I did want to follow up. You know, in the beginning, you know, Dennis, you had said, you know, the Republican Party is still the party of business. You know, Ron, you had said a lot of the things that business leaders are kind of clamoring for now often are in line with some of the Democratic priorities. You know, in your view, kind of last question, you know, is there one party right now that you think is really receptive to the needs of business more than the other?
Well, I'd make the case not only is the Republican Party more receptive to business, but I think they're more receptive to the workers. If you look today in Michigan, what we have is we can't fill the jobs we have. Wages are going up, and the jobs are increasing, so that's all very positive. So I think that because of the working with business, I think we've seen now that it's created by decreasing taxes, decreasing regulation, it does create jobs.
Let's be about issues instead of political parties. That's what I'd say.
All right. Thank you very much, and thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, very good.
Thank you, guys. That was an amazing panel. Ron, you sound like a politician. I don't know if that's in your future or not. But you bring up some very good points. I mean, when we talk about our next segment, Tammy is going to talk about some predictions as it relates to the gubernatorial election. And as they talked about workforce, you cannot talk about workforce without talking about education. And that was a lot of the topic in yesterday's gubernatorial debate.
It was, and I hope everyone had a chance to tune in to see the debate. Certainly it gave a good opportunity for our next panel coming up to be able to talk a little further about predicting that race. I appreciated the comments, though, also about, from the previous panel about Governor Snyder. Governor Snyder has really laid a strong foundation. So we have that in place for whoever that next governor is.
And he's been a great partner to the chamber. When I was talking to the governor yesterday, I was telling him how much we appreciate the fact that he comes and he stays, he participates for a couple days. And I think his presence has brought a lot of value to the conference.
He certainly has. And so without further ado, let's talk a little bit about predicting the gubernatorial election.
Rick, Sean, Bill, take it away.
Okay, Sean Wilson, Truscott Rossman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bill Nowling, Lambert Edwards, both seasoned communications professionals with history in state politics. Bill and I actually go back a long ways from your time in the Michigan Senate.
And you still had me on, so that's a good time.
Someone else.
I'm the man in the middle here.
So the title of the session is Predicting the Gubernatorial Election. And considering what we've seen in 2016, can we really predict a race, both the primary and the general, this far out? And let's start at the far end with Bill.
Well, I think if you're looking for a prediction, I think you have to go back in the past and look at how the races, both in Michigan and nationally, set up in 2010. Obama had negatives that were in the 40s, and there was a net 900-seat swing in legislative races across the United States. It was a big year for Republicans. We have those same numbers, yet the intensity of the negative against Trump is much higher. So I think that part is unknown yet, and that's what makes predicting it. I think Republicans are swimming against the stream this year, but there is opportunity to do those, and those numbers are coming back. But it's a tough year for Republicans, no doubt.
Yeah, and it's a tough year for Democrats. Going back on the national scene, I think the Democrats are looking for a message. I mean, if you ask 10 Democrats what their message is, you'll get 10 different answers. So the irony of this session predicting the gubernatorial election, it's very unpredictable at this point. And I think at the debate last night was a testament to just how in disarray we are with this race with no clear standout.
Mm-hmm. Well, and let's talk about the debate last night. Okay, first question is, so today, 6 candidates, 1 hour. I mean, that they covered a lot of ground. Who's celebrating today, and who's in mourning?
Well, I was looking around, and if you're a candidate and you're walking around the parlor today, you're in mourning because, you're trying to figure out what was going on. The two people we really haven't seen this morning, and I think that they were the winners last night, were Bill Schuette and Gretchen Whitmer. I think that if you looked at how the differences between their answers and their positions on the issues, much more thought out, much more polished. There was a big degree of separation between those two and the others that were on the stage with them last night. So I think that those two were the clear winners. But to Sean's point, there really was no message that came out except for the very base message that each candidate spoke to their constituencies about. This was not a debate for the people at the Mackinac conference. They were talking to people downstate that were going to turn out in the primary elections. And so you had very partisan, very what I would call standardized answers to energize their base to get them to turn out to vote.
Well, in this environment, considering the data that Bill was just talking about and the prospect of a blue wave in November, and of course we're focused more right now on the August primary, but does it matter what these guys say, or do they just have to figure out how to surf the prevailing tide?
I think they have to, a little bit of both. I mean, people are looking for substance. They're looking for strong policy issues. I'm not sure if education was a strong point. I didn't see the debate, I'll be honest with you, but I know people are really concerned about education. I think Dr. Vitti had a standout moment here, a drop the mic moment in his presentation. Folks in Detroit are particularly interested in what we're going to do from an educational standpoint, and I don't think that was discussed the way it should have, especially from the Democratic side.
Are you hearing, is there any breakout message that's either, that's waiting for people to talk about?
Well, fix the damn roads was what I heard yesterday.
And the schools.
And the schools, and that's the problem. I mean, they tend to be platitudes, and they're not really, depending on if you're Republican or Democrat, not necessarily a base issue. I mean, I thought that Schuette stumbled on the education question quite a bit, but he was fine. And other places, I thought his answer on the road, he had he had a plan. He was able to articulate it very clearly. So it was fine for that. I thought that the most impassioned I saw Lieutenant Governor was when he was talking about education. When he was specifically talking about special education, because I know that's something that's
near and dear
to his heart. So it was good to see him warm up and come out and do that. But it was a hard environment to really kind of pick out what were going to be the themes going forward.
And that's just my question is, everyone says that they're pro-education. We're going to fix the roads, we're going to fix the schools, and then you get into the minutia of policy debates. But there doesn't seem to be, at this juncture at least, some breakout message that separates one or two of the candidates from the rest of the pack. I mean, really, it's in terms of the debate, Bill and I have talked about this.
Yeah.
I don't think candidates win debates so much as they either survive them or lose them.
So I think what was interesting is that for all of the money that Sri Tanadar has spent for folks to get his name right, he really didn't have a good performance yesterday. And if anybody took a hit from the debate, I think it was him. So for all the input he's put into folks getting his name right, he needs to sharpen his message.
And yet you go to the rest of the state, if the public opinion research is to be believed, and there are reasons to believe it and reasons to not believe it, that he's one or two in most of the.
Well, I think he spent the most money up to now.
He has clearly spent the most money.
So look, we're in a primary season. We've got a full slate of candidates, and primary elections are different than general elections. Primary elections are about finding your voters, keeping them happy, and making sure that they turn out
in August.
And that if you listen to the messages yesterday, all of the messages from all the candidates were geared to make sure that all of their constituencies understood where they, on those very important issues. We're very fragmented now. Candidates do not spend time convincing voters that they're right or wrong. They spend time making sure that they're connecting with people that think just like them. And that's part of the reason why we're polarized.
I mean, they spend time getting people to like them until they get down to the nitty-gritty of the primaries.
And yet still, I mean, we've got a little bit of time, but right now, the leader of the pack in both primaries is undecided.
Yes.
But that's always the case. And,
yes.
As people kind of spill off in those polls of saying I'm not going to vote, you start to see how that shapes up. I'm not so much worried about polls at this point. You look at the candidates that have the strongest machine. Good candidates win elections.
Right.
Bill Schuette, Gretchen Whitmer, they're good candidates. As I said, it's like playing Alabama. These teams are going to be well coached. They're going to be fast. They're going to be tough. And they got to make a mistake for you to beat them. And I think that's where we're at right now.
Well, one thing to think about is maybe this is the year where the running mate makes a difference. I know Gretchen has floated out potential candidates. It would be critical for her.
Abdul El-Sayed has also set up a process for.
He set up a process, though. But maybe this is the year where the running mate really makes the difference on who that standout candidate is.
Well, there can. But what would a running mate? How would a running mate be a game changer? Like I'm thinking back to when Jim Blanchard was running to replace Bill Milliken, and he bought himself some gravitas by putting veteran Congresswoman Martha Griffiths on the ticket. That's the last time I can remember a running mate really being a game changer.
Only three things happen when you name a running mate, and two of them are bad. So it's like your debate theory is that you survive it. You get somebody that's not going to weigh you down, is not going to do that in there. But it's really
and it's not going to outshine you.
Yeah, you don't want somebody to outshine you either.
So there's a sleeping giant in Detroit, a regional Southeast Michigan, that hasn't been awoken probably since the Obama election. So that running mate, perhaps like a Garland Gilchrist, who was kind of trotted out early as a potential running mate, could be the person that connects her to the community and really gets people excited about her candidate.
Well, looking ahead to November, if Democrats are going to win, Democrats are going to have to deal with their turnout problem. And that's exactly what you're talking about. Exactly.
Getting these folks out, because as we know, Southeast Michigan can make a difference and be the deciding vote for the election.
Yeah, John Boehner referenced it in his talk. He said that elections are decided by people who show up.
Right. Absolutely.
And pollsters don't necessarily do a good job of identifying the people who are going to show up.
Well, because you don't know they're going to show up until they do.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So, I want to circle back to the primary, though, because the general will be determined by turnout. The primary is the one where the general, you've got to identify your base and make sure that they turn out. Hopefully, you've healed the rifts that have occurred in the primary. But how do you break out when you've got so many candidates in both primaries? What should we be looking for next now that these people are about to leave the island?
Well, I think you're going to see candidates continue to speak to those, core wing base issues either on the right or the left, because it's really about identifying those voters. There's no time to go out and convince undecided voters. There are no really undecided voters in the primary. People are turning out to support somebody that they're activists within the party, they're connected, they're turning out to support their candidate. So I think you're going to see them continue to do that, and then maybe a code switch right after the primary and start to talk to a more general Michigan electorate audience.
But some of the candidates are speaking more to a grassroots audience. I'm thinking in terms of Shri, Tanadar, El Sayed, and Gretchen, are really striking a chord with some of the grassroots audience as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can buy name ID. You can't buy organization, although you can buy part of, somewhat, by part of it. But you can't buy organization. Who's best organized right now?
Oh, I think without a doubt it's Schuette, and on the Republican side, Schutte's more organized. He has more endorsements locked up. I mean, he's running. I like to say he's running a campaign from 1994, but it's a good campaign. It's a traditional Republican primary campaign that I think is strong. I think it's going to. And I'm undecided I haven't endorsed anybody in the election, but he's running the best campaign right now, the most organized, I think, on our side.
Okay. What about in the entire field? Would you say he's more organized than Whitmer?
To me, it just seems a little more organized than Whitmer. I'm not that familiar with Gretchen's campaign structure, but there's time for her to lock that in before the general campaign starts.
Yeah, I would agree to some extent, though, but she is very organized. She just needs to be more stronger in the Detroit market.
Mm-hmm. And how does she get stronger in the Detroit market?
Well, it could go back to that running mate. It could go back to make some selective hires of her campaign team, strengthening that campaign team in Detroit, though. But she has a pretty good team, just need to shore it up in Detroit.
Would it be a good idea for her to start naming a cabinet?
Probably not this early in the game.
I mean, it would be a little nerdy, but it would also be a little bit bold.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it this early, but probably closer to the primary, which really try to get those voters out. It may be a good opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, look, at this stage of the game, no matter if you're running for governor or state legislature, it's knock on doors, raise money, talk to voters.
Yep.
Get up the next day, do it again. And that's what they need to be doing right now.
Okay, so generic, I'll start with you. Generic Republican candidate going into the primary, leaving the island. Bill, what's your advice for them now?
Knock on doors, raise money, talk to voters, get up tomorrow and do it again. People and candidates that do that, I don't care what side of the aisle on, they win elections, and that can't be, especially in times where the tides are tough for Republicans. They need to go out and knock on more doors to reconnect with the voters that elected them.
Are candidates that are not on the air making a mistake?
No.
Okay.
They need to be knocking on doors.
Sean, just got
I would agree, but also focus on the issues that really matter to people. Education, fix the roads, the economy, focus on those key issues and getting those people out.
And you think issues still matter?
Absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
In these wave elections.
Absolutely.
Sean Wilson, Bill Nowling, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, that was interesting, Dennis. I always like hearing the different perspectives from folks about what's important for the next election, and I like to really understand how people profile who that winning candidate's going to be.
Right. It seems like, from everyone I've talked to, it seemed like that Mr. Schuette and Ms. Whitmer were the standouts, although I thought that everyone did a good job at confirming their position, and I think we got a good vision into how people are going to run their campaigns and what people's platforms are going to look like.
Yeah, I would agree. And now we're going to continue on with some other interesting discussion, which is about forecasting our congressional races. which is interesting across our state, but I think especially back home in Detroit for that 13th district with I don't know how many candidates are there.
Yeah, two very interesting races that I hope the panel will talk about is obviously John Conyers' seat that's being vacated, but also with Mr. Trott stepping out of his seat. And that's going to be a very contentious race as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So I guess at this point, we're going to turn it over to you, Rick.
Thanks, Tammy. Appreciate it very much. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Zoe Clark and to Howard Edelson, Michigan Radio, political analyst, consultant, guru all around. Quickly, I want to say.
That's the title now,
Guru. Yeah, Guru, yeah. He's got shirts with that. I want to start quickly by saying a couple of things. One is there are some historical norms that we know about midterm elections.
Yes.
For party in power, the president is selected. That first midterm election can be pretty tough for congressional races, so Republicans have that.
Yes.
We also have a very unsettled electorate, and anybody who tells you they know with specificity what's going to happen in this election cycle is either a fool or a liar. So what we're going to do is give you as good a guess as we can, and we're going to go exactly to those races. I'm going to skip all the way past the 6th district. Quickly, 7th district, Tim Walberg has historically had quite a bit of pressure on that seat, but he has prevailed. What do we expect?
Right, so it's always been that thing in that 7th about kind of money, right? And so as you're looking at the other congressional races, seeing where folks actually want to pool resources. And Walberg has always kind of been a little under the radar when it comes to that, but I think this is going to have to do with what kind of wave election, if there is a wave election, but we're not making predictions. But if there is, you would need to see a big majority for him to lose that seat, more so than, let's say, a bishop in the 8th or something like that.
And this is a rematch. Gretchen Driscoll is a rematch, and she didn't do very well last time, but there were macro impacts on that race. I think it's going to be a close race, as Zoe said. Is there going to be a wave, and is it going to help her? And at congressional level races, you really do need organization, boots on the ground, hitting doors, and that'll be part of the difference, too.
Mike Bishop in the 8th district. That's one that you and I talked about earlier.
Yeah, this is an important seat. This is an open. This is not an open seat. This is in part for majority. A great candidate, Alyssa Slotkin, who is raising a lot of money, a lot of organization. Year of the Woman, potential wave. I think this is a flippable seat, and Republicans are worried about this one.
Those are two potentials if they develop, but Bishop has still got pretty good name ID and has an organization.
He does, but watch this overall narrative of how Alyssa Slotkin is running as a Democrat. And we saw that with Connor Lamb in Pennsylvania, right? So sort of, I don't want to say establishment Democrats because she hasn't run or been in office, but sort of hawkish Democrats, right? And also whether or not she's talking about she would vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. And that's been something too. Same with the Connor Lamb. Where are Democrats coming down with that? So that's that kind of bigger macro level.
Yep, and Trump is going to be a factor. This is going to be a nationalized race.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, off-year elections, the party out of power tends to pick up seats. This is one of those seats. Trump will be a factor in this race. And in Oakland County, there's a changing suburban Democratic independent vote that's starting to trend Democrat. So all the factors are in Alyssa Slotkin's favor.
Yeah.
Will we agree that the Trump factor will be different depending district to district? I mean, there are some places where it's going to play much bigger, some places where it may be kind of a non-issue.
Oh, absolutely.
So
I mean, look at the first up north. Oh, yeah, sure. And but again, this goes back to the making predictions about the Trump factor that all of us have been sort of scratching our head now for, almost 2 years about how does that narrative play. It will be very different than I think in the primaries, as we've been talking about this morning.
So if there's a Republican primary and Republican primary voters, President Trump has an 80-90% approval rating. They want his endorsement. So you get his endorsement, then all of a sudden, what happens in the general election in these marginal seats?
Yeah.
It's going to be an factor.
And in case people forgot, Donald Trump did endorse Bill Schuette. I just want to put that out there.
I heard that mentioned. 9th district. First of our open seats, what will be the old Sander Levin seat. What do we think?
Yeah, so that's going to be another one. I mean, I think we all can say safe Dem, right? Yeah. But open seat and part of this narrative. And looking at Michigan congressional delegation in a whole and sort of the lost amount of institutional knowledge, that this is one more seat. We've got, the dean of the House, the former Boumediene Dingle, and all of this institutional knowledge. And this is one more name and one sort of lion of the House that we're saying goodbye to.
What do you know about that? You have two good, top quality candidates on the Democratic side, Congressman Levin's son, Andy Levin, and Ellen Kojin Lipton. Both are very good candidates. They're raising money. They're working hard.
And watch the money in that race.
Yeah. And I'd give this one to Andy Levin. I think the Levin name in that district is a brand that can't be beat.
One of the races I'm the most interested in is in the 11th. That's where Dave Trott is stepping down.
One of many Republicans, incumbent
40
Republicans,
plus,
to be stepping down.
And he was a little early to the game.
He was. He absolutely was. And early to the game as a Republican, I remember it actually made waves, right, when he tweeted something about the president needing to tweet less and work more, or something like that. One of the first Republicans to kind of, be part of that.
So what does that race look like post-primary?
So this is a marginal Republican seat. This is an open seat. This is a flippable seat. If Democrats want to gain control of the Congress, this is an important seat, and I think it's also been targeted nationally. So you have three Republican candidates, all working hard. One, Lena Epstein, who's outraised everybody, over $1 million+ I think she'll win the primary. And then on the Democratic side, you have three good candidates. Again, you have Sunil Gupta, you have Haley Stevens, and then you have Tim Grimal. All bring strengths to the ticket. That's a toss-up on the Democratic side, and it'll be who has the money and who has boots on the ground turning their voters out.
Absolutely, and that's another one that I would sort of say is within that sort of same region as the 8th, right? That if Democrats are going to take back the House, they would love that seat. But we'll see what actually happens.
I want to come back to that if time permits, because I want to move on to the 13th, and that may be the one that's got more people running in it than I've seen in a primary in a long time, and some people who may not be running in it, depending on what the courts decide.
Right.
Howard, let me start with you. Where do we go with this 13th? Again, safe Democratic seat.
Safe Democratic seat. I think you have, as you said, the cast of Ben-Hur is running, but you have probably 4 candidates that, because of money and endorsements, really rise to the top. You have Ian Conyers, state legislator, similar name to Congressman Conyers' relative nephew. He's putting together a credible campaign. Brenda Jones, city council member. She's been endorsed by Mayor Duggan, an important endorsement. And the Duggan machine doesn't like to lose. So the question, will he turn his machine out for Brenda Jones? And then you have 2 other, Bill Wild, mayor of Westland, and Rashida Tlaib, former legislator. So this one's a toss-up, and it's really, is the Duggan machine going to turn out?
And a lot of talk about whether could we see actually for the first time a congressional candidate or a member of Congress who doesn't actually live in the city of Detroit representing much of Detroit in Congress.
I think part of his strategy is that you have all but him living in the city, and can all those people divide up the vote, and then the mayor of Westland sneak up the middle.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about resource, what you were talking about a minute ago.
Sure.
And I want to do it particularly as we look at the 8th, maybe not so much the 7th, but the 8th and the 11th, because those are 2 districts that you identify that if Democrats want to take over the House of Representatives, those are the kind of places they have to flip. So what kind of resource relative to other races or other states do we think they're going to put in here? Because this is a big race in Michigan because we got so much on the ballot, but all 435 members are up, and so there's pressure everywhere.
Sure.
So there is a limited amount of money. So are these the races that they're the kind of races they're going to target?
Oh, absolutely. Right. I think particularly the Alyssa Slotkin seat, because what we have seen nationally so far in so many special elections is that she is the kind of candidate that is winning these seats or has been able to. So absolutely. I think the 8th more so than the 11th at this point for Democratic money. But I'd love to, Howard.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think they're going to be very expensive races. They're going to be, when you have the candidate money and the independent expenditure money, probably anywhere $5 million plus, because you have to buy Detroit TV, and that's not cheap. And radio for our radio friends.
So when you look at this overall, and you look, and again, I know what we all may think. We may think that this paradigm is how this is going to play out. But after 2016, I have understand now that what I know is that I don't know. So when we look at what could happen, Give me an idea of what the makeup of Congress looks like in January.
Yes, Howard, give us the makeup of Congress come January.
And numbers,
well, and
too.
have me back if you can call me a liar or a fool, right? I think at worst case, it's a narrow margin. Best case, the Democrats get majority. And there are other factors that are beyond all of our controls. That's why it's hard to make predictions. The economy, how is that working? Is this blue tide? Is it going to hit at the right time, or is it going to fade? What is Donald Trump going to do with trade wars? And, is he going to manufacture a crisis to, bring back his base? I mean, there's so many variables that are beyond our control. Hard to predict, but best case, they take control. Worst case, it's a narrower majority, which is good because then Democrats and Republicans are going to have to work together, because if you don't have a supermajority, you have to reach out across the aisle.
Right, and in all of this, we haven't even yet talked about the Senate seat,
Well,
right?
yeah.
Well, I guess I just gave you the Ford promote of that.
There we go. You did. No, but so what about that Senate seat? I mean,
Well, so we've got incumbent Debbie Stabenow, who's just proved over the past decade and a half that she is the candidate who just keeps going. She's got a large war chest and has been unbeatable as a Senate candidate here in Michigan, and that is because she is a campaigner, right? And knows how to do this thing.
And she's a good senator. She delivers for the state. She's on ag committee and important committees for the state. So she produces for the state. She does good constituent services. She's back here. She works hard. And that's why the Republicans have a hard time recruiting candidates. And so I think Debbie Stabenow is on her way to re-election. She's not going to take it for granted. She's working hard, raising a lot of money. But
and dirty little secret, Republicans are sort of okay with that as a candidate with Debbie Stabenow. I mean, obviously, if they got their wish, they would put in a Republican. But what you see again with the resources conversation, you're debating where you're going to put your money. And you know what? They I think there are bigger races that would have more of an effect on us than trying to take out this sitting U.S.
Part of that has to do with the ability of a candidate to bring money to the table too. And I mean, a candidate has to show the ability to be a good fundraiser before you get the attention of the senatorial committee or the NRCC, because they're not going to put their money in until you put yours in, right?
Exactly right. I mean, to sell your candidacy, you have to be viable. So what does that mean? You have to have a good narrative. You have to be able to raise money and have the right people around you. And she has all of the above. And if on the flip side, you see that the other candidate is so strong, well, you're going to take your resources and spend them in another state or another congressional district, because there is, believe it or not, only limited dollars. And at the end of the day, you have to allocate those resources, and it's a chess game.
But it is interesting to watch the Republican primary right now. Two candidates. We thought there were going to be a lot more, and there was a lot of talk about who was going to be in that primary. Now we've got John James, we've got Sandy Pensler. So it's going to be. We'll watch that one and see what kind of spending.
Well, look at Lena Epstein. I think she was running for the U.S. Senate, realized it was a lot of headwind, and then had an epiphany. Well, why don't I go run for Congress in the 11th?
Indeed, and we had the former Supreme Court Justice as well, Bob Young, who then dropped out. So now it's down to 2.
So when you get done with all of this, we are almost out of time. You think that at least over in the House, things will be very close, if not a change in majority. The Senate is already so close. What happens there?
I'm sorry, the House, and then what was
the Senate? The Senate. What do the pickups look like, or losses?
The Senate. I think the Senate gets more narrow as well.
Could be hard for it to get much more narrow.
Agreed. And again, but to absolutely go back to what Howard said, it is now the beginning of June, and we have months and months, and what we know, as we have all seen, is anything can happen.
And this pendulum, as you were saying earlier, the off year, people out of the White House, the pendulum swings back. It's how far?
Yeah.
And we'll find out in a few months.
We will find out.
Howard, thank you very much. Tammy?
Thank you so much, Rick. That was a great discussion. And so we're really talking a lot of politics this morning. And it's great how folks are so wide awake and able to talk all these issues this morning after this long week.
It's a double espresso, I think.
Yeah.
I'm very interested, as we talk about these elections, we first focused on the gubernatorial race and now some of the congressional races. What's very interesting is, in managing a state, much less a country, you have different constituents. And what's being discussed a lot now is the different needs and focuses of the rural communities versus the inner city and urban communities. And so I'm very much looking forward to Nolan's panel that's coming up to talk about that divide and to talk about how candidates have to have a singular message but have to address multiple constituencies.
Right, and if you think about the size of Michigan, you know, how far north and how rural you can get compared to a dense urban area can be very different just with an issue like broadband.
Absolutely. Nolan, we're going to let you take it away. We look forward to your discussion. Good morning.
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, Tammy. I'm here with Jason Allen, former state senator and now state director for rural development for the U.S. Ag Department, and Nicole Wells Stallworth, assistant VP of government relations and community relations at Oakland University. Before we get started, Jason, I just got to ask, where could a man get a suit like that?
Well, this is made in Cleveland, Tennessee, in a rural part of Tennessee, a small manufacturer that we sell at our family's business.
Okay, well, you certainly look sharp. You both look sharp.
Thank you, sir.
This morning, you're embarrassing me to death in my jeans and golf shirt. It got a little drunk out last night on Mackinac Island, so
you look
I'm
good in
doing
a
the
bow
best
tie,
I
sir.
can. I might try a bow tie. So we've been hearing a lot since the 2016 presidential election about the difference between urban voters and rural voters, and the sense that urban voters or rural voters prevailed, rural and suburban voters prevailed in the last election. And in Michigan, of course, we see this state increasingly population being centered in urban areas, becoming more urban and less rural, and it plays out in a number of issues. I mean, Jason, you all have the best roads up here in the state. I drive on these roads. Once we pass Midland, feels like I'm driving in Ohio and not Michigan. I mean, you don't have the same horror stories, and part of the reason for that is Public Act 51, which distributes road money not based on population, but on other factors, and so you get a disproportionate amount of the road money up here. That's one issue. Is it time, given the urbanization of our population, for us to start looking at those kind of formulas and favoring the places where more people live?
Well, I think that is one of the mix in rural America. And sort of in our role, certainly infrastructure has been one of the sort of preeminent areas. And so we have been focusing a lot on sort of how do we work on better partnerships with our local units of government to help assist in these types of decisions that are being made on a local level. Because of our rural nature, we have the ability to support road commissions and municipalities to build that sort of infrastructure that is necessary for attraction of tourism, agricultural development, which is part of the reason why this area has been so successful is the agriculture nature of it and the growth that's been going on, which is dependent on good infrastructure.
Nicole, is all of that coming at the expense of urban residents who are providing the bulk of the funding and the bulk of the tax dollars?
I don't think so. The state of Michigan most of us realize that the state of Michigan is primarily rural. We have some urban.
In terms of its geography.
In terms of the geography, that's right. And so I think that it's important to make certain that as we begin to think about how we create an infrastructure process to support the people of the state of Michigan, that we consider that we need to be supportive of our entire state such that it can be successful. The good thing that Jason mentioned is that we talk about agriculture. We are dependent on some of the agricultural areas that support our urban areas, and so I don't think that it's at the expense of our urban areas. I think it's really important to kind of be more cognizant in terms of those levels of decision making and working together to support the entire state.
Jason, do you think that our political class in this state, in this nation, hears the voices of rural voters and rural residents?
Well, I think the thing that's been most interesting has been sort of what the template has been laid out in the Department of Agriculture. There was a report given to the Michigan Farm Bureau and the National Farm Bureau in January, which has laid out some very specific objectives that we have to address over these next 3 years. Item number 1 is rural connectivity, which is the aspect of broadband and what is necessary to help with precision farming, because if you're going to be competitive in agriculture, you're going to have to be able to be better utilization of your input costs. Number 2 is attraction of talent into rural America. Number 3 is
same problem
right,
in that urban area.
Right, and then the next big area is sort of what are we going to be doing on sort of the healthcare, what are we going to be doing to support that, and then the final area is entrepreneurship.
Nicole, you think about the leadership in this state and the potential leadership in the state, very heavily weighted to outstate Michigan. I think all of our legislative leadership is now from outstate, and you look at the gubernatorial candidates, most if not all of them live outside of the Detroit metro area, at least the Tri-County metro area. Does that shortchange the voters in that urban area?
I don't know. I don't believe it shortchanges anyone. One of the things that's important, I think, to be able to recognize, in particular when we talk about leadership within the state, is to be able to have that perspective. Many of us realize that the issues that many people who live in rural communities have are very similar to urban communities. However, juxtaposedly, it's important to really understand the issues that Detroiters have, which are very much different than the rest of the state of Michigan. So I wouldn't say that it shortchanges anything. I would also say it's an opportunity to become more engaged and aware and to really recognize where the similarities lie and to be able to find middle ground as we begin to address some of these issues.
So where do the similarities lie? Where do the differences lie between the two groups of?
Well, I think one area, if I may, is the whole issue of poverty. And so the Wall Street Journal did a very good job, if you haven't had an opportunity to review that last fall, on rural poverty issues. And they are very significant and often as challenging as they are in urban areas. And then the actual urban versus rural economic mobility often is a real challenge for students to be able to find employment in their communities. And I think those are very similar to what we're having in urban communities.
So we had this whole entire discussion around mobility this time around, and things that we don't often think about is the time it takes for a kindergartner to be able to make it to school in a rural community.
True.
And many of those children, 5-year-olds, are on a bus for an hour just to be able to get to school in the morning. We have similar issues in Detroit, just being able to get transportation, be able to have access to transportation, to be able to get to some of the suburban communities where, for example, where Oakland University is. That's a really good example. It's a 30-minute commute. There's not really a transportation infrastructure in place for people to be able to access the campus. So we talk about those kinds of things. Again, poverty issues, access to quality education, access to health care. So those are some of the kinds of things that I think we can all rally around and be able to develop a policy agenda that speaks to almost everyone.
Jason, do you worry that the rural communities, particularly the more remote rural communities in our state, are going to be shut out of this mobility revolution, that you have so many off-the-track roads, if you will, off-the-map roads, that mobility is not going to work, and the autonomous future is not going to work as well in rural America, rural Michigan, as it will in urban Michigan?
Well, some of the things that we've seen in the actual agricultural area and what they're doing in the ability to operate farm vehicles in very challenging climate and environment has been remarkable. And certainly there are going to be, if you're going to be heading out into rural parts of the Upper Peninsula, rural parts of Michigan, challenges. But as we expand the broadband network and the fiber and where we're headed, hopefully that will catch up. The millions of dollars that are available for infrastructure in the fiber space or the broadband space is coming to us through rural utilities, through specific areas in agriculture, and hopefully that will help support these types of things.
So, there is a technology divide. Just as there is a technology divide within urban areas between, on the basis of economics, there's a technology divide on the basis of geography in our state.
So to give you an example of somebody that's really used rural utility dollars is Midwest Electric and Communications down in Cassopolis, and they have put in a gigabyte using to every household, and they've used our federal dollars to support that. And then you get into other communities which have not had the vision to access these types of tools, and it's been very challenging to get capacity.
So we hear a lot about, we've talked a lot this week about the shortage of workers, and that's particularly acute of skilled workers, particularly acute in the urban areas in Metro Detroit, where every company is looking for workers of every skill level. Rural areas, you tend to see unemployment a bit higher, more workers than job opportunities, and there's a lot of discussion about how to bring jobs into that area, those areas. Should the discussion change? Should it be how to bring those workers to where the jobs are rather than the jobs to where the workers are?
Well, the thing that you got to look at, and then I apologize, is the connectivity. If there's the capacity to get there, I would argue that it's much easier to bring the manufacturing to those small communities.
I would argue a little bit differently in terms of how we utilize our resources. I think it's really important for us to be thinking about how we utilize our resources in ways that best support an infrastructure that we have in place. And so if we're going to be concentrating our efforts to attract, retain, support, develop talent, we need to be making certain that we're doing that in a way that makes sense for the entire state of Michigan. I always think about whether or not I'm in favor of taking and distributing our resources to the point where we're not able to really support that. And so I would be in favor of perhaps creating a pipeline to be able to share and exchange. One of the better things about the rural areas is the agricultural aspect. So if there are people in some of these urban communities that are interested in agriculture, they might want to travel to one of these rural communities. However, if it's something that we're talking about manufacturing, we're talking about some of the more technologically based aspects of our economy, then perhaps some of those individuals in those rural communities might want to be able to travel to some of the urban areas to be able to take advantage of those opportunities.
Jason, do you sense that as our population shifts and as it moves more into urban areas, that the understanding of the two groups, the urban residents and the rural resident, that's growing, that's lessening, that there's less in common?
It's a transition. As you know, we've gone from an agrarian economy to an industrial economy. Now we're into sort of the next waves of things. We see significant declining high school graduation rates in so many of the smaller communities, really north of Clare. And so as you look at those footprints, you have seen fewer people having an understanding of deer hunting, having an understanding of farming, having an understanding of being out in the woods and enjoying the beauty of our state. And so we have to continually make sure people enjoy the beauties of our communities.
Nicole?
So I would say that, we don't shoot deer in the backyard in Detroit.
Perhaps
so
we
that's
should.
Probably, because there are many. But so just in terms of the cultural differences, it's great to be able to have that type of a difference, but there's a big difference in terms of understanding the culture. And I think it's important to try to create and facilitate ways for us to more of us to be able to take the time to really understand the difference in culture. I mean, you talk about, hunting, those sorts of things, and being able to use rifles and firearms. That's really not something that, from an urban perspective, in an urban community, that's smiled upon necessarily.
But here we are, and that's what we're trying to do. Jason Allen, Nicole Wellstaller, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Tammy, Dennis?
Thank you, Nolan. I would say you have the best dressed panel so far.
Absolutely.
You guys look outstanding this morning.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's a lot of talk, Tammy, as it relates to the candidates that are on the ballot statewide, but there's some significant issues that are on the ballot. So I look forward to Stephen's panel and discussing what those issues are. One that's getting a lot of attention is the cannabis and the recreational push there. And it's become, I think, very political, because there are those that say that the Republican Party is moving fast and swiftly trying to get that done legislatively, so it doesn't have to be on the ballot, because they feel like if recreational marijuana is on the ballot, that's going to bring out a lot of Democratic voters.
Yeah, it's certainly an issue that many states are dealing with right now in the nation, and whether they proceed or not. And there's some states who have proceeded and economically are really benefiting from it. So I think that'll probably be one of the best issue discussions up here right now.
Stephen, we look forward to your discussion this morning.
Good morning, Dennis.
Good morning.
And Tammy.
Good morning,
Take it away.
Stephen.
I will. With me to talk about the many ballot proposals that we might see in November is Shelley Weisberg of the ACLU and John Pirich of the Honigman firm. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Good morning.
So I want to start here. I want to talk about ballot initiatives sort of generally, and why I'm not a fan of ballot initiatives. There's two reasons I think that they're problematic. One is that they often deal with pretty complicated legislative imperatives, and they rob us of the ability to sort of shape those legislative ideas, right? I want to do this, but I only get to say yes or no to it. I don't get to say, yeah, I like that, but maybe we could change this, or maybe we could think of it in a different way. And so I think that the potential to make bad law is really high with ballot proposals. The other reason I don't really care for them is that you have to buy your way onto the ballot in the state of Michigan. I mean, the way the rules are set up, you really do have to pay to get signatures, and we do have a ballot initiative this year that's an exception to that, but it's sort of an exception that sort of proves the rule. So I want to get both of you to talk just a little about ballot initiatives and whether we're doing that right in the state of Michigan.
Well, I don't disagree with you fundamentally, except that in my experience as a lobbyist for the last 17 years, what I can say about why ballot initiatives seem more important now is because we've had this very kind of volatile legislature, and they change the rules depending on who's in power. So for the purposes of our ballot initiative, which is promote the vote, to put common sense voting rights into the Constitution, we're doing so because the legislature has simply failed to modernize our voting system. Right. And so the Promote the Vote ballot initiative is a constitutional amendment that sets standards which the legislature or the Secretary of State will have to then shape the policies around. So to that extent, there is, there's going to be some public oversight into what that looks like. But I think we're in an era where, because of the division of the parties and the, we versus them attitude, that we can't depend on the legislature to make the rules that are necessary. So it's direct democracy has become the default.
Yeah. John?
Well, we're one of 7 states that allows direct participatory democracy through ballot proposals. I think your point, though, is a valid point, and that is, other than the bottle bill in 1976 and this year's current redistricting proposal, most of the proposals have been purchase proposals.
Right.
And if you have $1.5 million to $2 million, you can get anything on the ballot if you are organized and prepared to get signatures in 180 days. I think it's a valid criticism to say it had a fundamental reason for being in our Constitution initially. From back to 1908 we've had it.
Right.
But since the 61-62 convention, a lot has changed. And one of the big changes, as you point out, is paid circulators. That just changed everything. Now we have invasions of circulators who come in from other states who have no interest in this community, this state. And the difference between a community-based petition like the bottle bill or, like in this case, the redistricting is fundamental.
Yeah. So let's start by talking about the redistricting proposal. Voters, not politicians. What do we think of that idea?
I am all for some rules around redistricting. They did an amazing job going out and getting support for it. It's a complicated proposal.
Mm-hmm.
And we certainly hope that at one point we can address this issue of gerrymandering in a way that's fair to everybody.
Yeah.
I'm supportive of the concept and I don't have any predictions on whether it will pass.
But I think the problem with it is so complicated,
Yes.
and whether it passes constitutional muster before it even gets to the ballot is the first question.
Yes.
Even then, if it does and it gets on the ballot, there will be further constitutional challenges, and it really changes the dynamic of this whole process.
Yeah.
We just don't know, unfortunately.
Right. And with that proposal in particular, my first concern about ballot proposals is this idea of up or down. You're changing the way that we choose our representatives in the state, and you're setting up an entire system through that ballot proposal without the give and take that I think would probably produce a better system on the back end.
But to your point, and to Shelley's point also, one of the problems going back to the bottle bill was the legislature repeatedly wouldn't bring up that issue. Wouldn't do it. So in that case, I think it served a very productive goal. But with some of the other ones that are on the ballot this year, or are going to try to be on the ballot this year or other years, it really isn't the same situation. It's people who go around the legislative process to say, I can buy this, I can put it on. And the energy issue is a good example.
Yeah.
California person comes in, spends a lot of money.
The 30 by 30 ballot
exactly.
that failed to get.
Well, there's going around the ballot. There's going around the legislature, and there's finally doing what the legislature should have been doing in the first place. So it's really holding the legislature to account for what they've just failed to do. I mean, the issues that are up for the ballot, paid sick leave, voting rights, gerrymandering, we've been asking the legislature to take care of those issues for the past decade or so, and they haven't. So this is where we are, right?
Do you want to talk more about Promote the Vote, which is...
Sure. Promote the Vote is a really common sense set of policies. That it's a constitutional amendment, because we all care about the integrity and security of our voting system. And Michigan has not updated, modernized voting in over a decade. We're one of the few states that hasn't. So this ensures no reason absentee voting. It ensures that military and overseas voters get their ballot in time so that their vote counts. It ensures that you can register to vote with ID up until the day of the election. It ensures that you can vote a secret ballot, because we saw what happened when Chris Kobach tried to get information out of our Secretary of State on Michigan voters. And it puts in a requirement that elections should be audited. There should be oversight, so we can make sure that everyone's vote count in a fair way.
Yeah.
So it's very common sense. It's got a lot of support. We are using a paid firm as well as volunteer signatures.
So who could be against those things?
I don't think anybody. I don't think we haven't seen a ton of opposition, to tell you the truth, because it is pretty.
But to be fair, there are people who can be against it, and there are people who are very much against it. And whether or not you find gerrymandering to be some despicable, dastardly process, the reality is it's been part of our political history. And we've had litigation about gerrymandering going on now for over 150 years. It's not a new subject. I think to your earlier point, as complicated as these kinds of proposals can be, the voters are left with a simple up or down. And you know what the campaign will be. If we have 6 proposals on the ballot this year, the most simple campaign message is going to be vote no on everything.
Right.
And that will resonate with a lot of the voters. It really will, because they don't understand. What's that.
But voters are smart, and especially now, I think voters are very aware about what's going on and how our democracy is not working very well. And I think we've seen voters really become much more in tune to this type of direct democracy. So I think a no campaign, it could certainly be successful. It's also unfortunately cynical, and I think we should give Michigan voters some credit for using their brains when they go to the ballot box.
But it's also expensive to make sure that they do understand what the proposals are. And there again, that introduces that dynamic where really well-funded ballot initiatives have a lot better.
It's an investment. That's
a lot better.
And another point, you can say voters are smart or voters get issues, but the problem is, let's take this upcoming election. There's going to be a 25% drop-off from the top of the ticket to ballot issues. So that automatically says 25% of the people who went out to vote for the top of the ticket aren't going to do anything. They're not even going to look at it. And we have the same problem with nonpartisan races, especially judgeships. I mean, people don't know who they're voting for.
Let's talk about the marijuana legalization proposal that I think we're likely to see. What do you think?
Well, we were the drafters of the petition, and as you know, it was certified, and let's see, Tuesday will be the 40th day deadline. Right. So unless the legislature adopts it, which I have no idea whether they will or won't, it will be on the ballot, definitely.
Yeah, and what do you think about that idea of the legislature trying to sort of go around the people? That's the opposite of what you were talking about.
I think they'll never. I can't in my wildest dreams imagine they could get it together enough to to pass something. I really don't. There's so much controversy within the legislature.
But that's where deal making comes in. I think they called that log rolling in the old days. If there was a way to put a deal together, I'm sure certain people would like to do that.
Yeah.
But the reality is, once certified and after the 40 session days pass, it's on the ballot.
On the ballot.
And I wanted to show you one quick thing. These are the ballot issues that were the petitions for this particular cycle. It's a tremendous amount of material information that's put out there on the street. And then when people are approached by a circulator, sign this petition. It's for making roads better, or it's making schools better, or helping children. No one knows what are in most of these proposals.
I disagree. I think people are engaged. I mean, I think people are much more engaged than I think you're giving them credit for, honestly. So
even with the circulators coming around and saying, here, sign this, you think people really understand what those are?
I've seen some of the circulators. They seem to know what they're talking about. People seem to want to engage in the process in that way. So
yeah.
Most of the circulators I talk to don't have the faintest idea what the proposal's about.
Right.
They truly don't.
John, what other ballot issues do you think we're likely to see in November?
Well, you already mentioned the two, the earned sick leave and the minimum wage proposals. They were just turned in last week, so we don't know yet what the situation with that is. There are 2 or 3 that obviously didn't make it. The Line 5 petition didn't make it. The part-time legislature didn't make it. The energy proposal, a compromise was worked out between the parties so that it was not on the ballot. And redistricting, we don't know because of litigation. And the last one is, of course, the promote to vote one.
And we're well on our way.
Yeah.
Sure.
If we were going to change something about the way we do this in Michigan, what would you put on the list there?
Ballots or
the ballot proposal.
Oh.
The process of ballot. Or do you think we're doing it right?
I don't have a problem with the way we use the process here in Michigan. I don't think we overuse it. I would say that the legislature could be more engaged in some comprehensive debates over these types of reforms. Yeah. That's what they were elected to do, and they should do it.
Right.
But I don't really I don't think our process has been abused.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. John?
It depends what cycle you're looking at. There are certain times I think the paid process really doesn't do us well as a state. There are other times I think that the population will, like for instance on marijuana right now, I think there's no doubt there's a groundswell of support for recreational as well as medical marijuana. That's how we got medical marijuana in the state, was through the ballot. So it just depends on issues. I don't think you can categorize it with one broad sweep.
Yeah, I mean that idea that the legislature should reclaim more of the policy-making process, the structure of the legislature, which is one of the things that we're thinking about with ballot proposals, sort of has a lot to do with that. I mean, it's hard to do that with the term limits that we have and with the gerrymandering.
Right. I think that's true that it's hard, but I don't think it should be used as an excuse. I mean, it's not a panacea to take away term limits. I wish they would, but it wouldn't be a panacea.
And term limits is another good example of, I think, a proposal that many people, in retrospect, wish we had not engaged in and was not approved. It's changed the dynamic dramatically.
It has.
Okay. Shelley Weisberg, John Pirich.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. It was a phenomenal panel. It was very interesting yesterday, talking about initiatives, and they mentioned the marijuana legalization. I thought that Mr. Boehner did an outstanding job answering that question from Devin.
Yeah, he did. Speaker Boehner just was so phenomenal in so many issues, but he's very much supportive of cannabis and moving forward with it. So I guess we'll wait and see. A lot of issues on the ballot this year. Obviously, a lot of offices on the ballot, but when you talk about really high voices around issues. We have one coming up now that is
High
really
voices,
getting...
no pun intended.
Yeah.
But I think it's very interesting. I look forward to the following panel. I mean, we have talked about, in many people's minds, transit exhaustively. I mean, we continue to talk about it. Right. I think a lot of us thought that we were there, including the county executive in Wayne. And it seems like we're not there yet. So I'm very interested to hear from the next panel, to hear, maybe you guys have some suggestions of how we can get there collectively. Take it from here. Good morning.
Thanks. I'm Craig Foley. With me today, Paul Glantz, founder and CEO of Imagine Entertainment. Thank you very much for being here. And of course, Khalil Rahal, who's the assistant county executive in Wayne County. All right, I'm going to start with you, Khalil, because it seems that we've had this conversation every single time I've been at this conference. Right. Going back, let's go back to 1978. We cannot get transit together in this region. We've never been able to come up with a unified system. And here we are again in 2018 having the same conversation. Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of talk, but no action. How do you get people to accept the idea of $5.4 billion?
Well, one, I tell you, that $5.4 billion, first, it yields back about $1.3 billion in state and federal and fare box funds to the region. So it's not as expensive as you may think. Today in our region, we spend about $67 a person on transit. Should the RTA get on the ballot, and if it does, we believe it'll pass, that number would go up to about $110, okay? Now, I'm not going to compare that to some of the major other regions in the country. New York spends $160 a person. Silicon Valley, the place that we're in constant competition with for talent and autonomous vehicle technology, they spend over $600 a person. But when you look at the Clevelands and the St. Louis's, and when you look at, Phoenix or Portland or Minneapolis, smaller MSAs, they are sometimes more than doubling our investment in regional transit. And if Amazon told us anything, they told us that investment into public transportation is key to bringing talent. It's going to bring the businesses we need in Wayne County. So people may say it's $5.4 billion. I say we can't afford not to spend that money.
Paul, I want to get your thoughts on that because we have been getting hammered this whole week about the idea about recruiting talent. Talent is attracted to things like good transit systems, new options for people. And it is something that is making us less competitive in a lot of people's eyes. Do you agree with that?
There's no question but that we do need a rapid transit system. And before we go out, I want to laud Khalil and County Executive Warren Evans for taking the initiative of driving this process forward, because I think that's very laudable. My opposition largely revolves around the thought that we're using 18th century technology to address a 21st century challenge. And here's what I would say, that if we aspire to be the leader in mobility throughout the United States and perhaps the world, which I think is a worthy goal for us, then I think we should be focused not on buses, but we should be focused on promoting autonomous vehicles as the means by which we achieve our goals.
Autonomous vehicles, though, are not with us quite yet. There's a lot of testing going on. We're doing a lot of research in that area, but we're not there yet. What's wrong with the stopgap system? In the meantime, increasing the buses until we actually get something that is going to be able to utilize emerging technology.
Well, I had the pleasure of listening to the presentation that Mr. Butler did the other day, and my impression is we're closer than we realize. And moreover, it's already being tested in places like Phoenix and Pittsburgh. And by the way, why is it Phoenix and Pittsburgh? It should be Detroit. This is the hub of mobility. We should be the beta test site for mobility using 21st century cutting edge technology.
Oh, well, Craig, look at the 220 businesses that came out. Look at the 23 CEOs. You've got Ford and GM, the leaders in autonomous vehicle technology, saying we need public transit now. When I had this conversation with Mark Royce and the other CEOs, they asked us, what is the lifetime of a bus? I'm a proud member of the Smart Board. The lifetime of buses can be anywhere from 8 to 12 years. We're not going to see the autonomous vehicle technology that we want to see penetrate the market anywhere near that time. But in the meantime, I guarantee you this, we will continue to lose out on the Amazons, Foxcons, U.S. Armies, and everybody else that thought Detroit was on this major comeback, that they wanted to at least explore this option to see if we were ready to make it all the way back. And so again, I feel like we just can't afford to just wait until, whatever the Jetsons may bring us in the future, right?
One of the things that we've been hearing a lot in terms of the opposition to this, Paul, though, is this notion that, look, this is something I'm never going to use. I don't utilize public transit. I've got my car. I shouldn't have to pay for this.
Well, here's what I would tell you, Craig. I am absolutely not opposed to helping the disabled the elderly and subsidize them, as well as those who are low-income workers. I think a subsidy and a cost structure that's designed to help those folks afford transportation makes perfect sense. But when we put in place a cost structure and agree to overlay another government entity on top of existing government bureaucracies in order to essentially facilitate a lifestyle among millennials who don't want to buy cars, I don't see that as an appropriate use of taxpayer dollars.
Why not?
Well, because honestly, it is not much more than a redistribution of wealth. I mean, I can tell you in my case, I've run the numbers. It's going to cost us $315,000 per year in additional property taxes on our theaters in order to subsidize what I could really pay, $100,000 a year if you told me I need my workers to get to, be able to get to Imagine.
Well, your theaters are in opt-out communities, a lot of them.
Yeah.
Novi, Canton, both opt-out communities. Your employees do need to get to work.
And by the way,
it'd be helpful if they could actually get there on a bus and not have to walk the last 3 miles.
Well, we don't have a challenge right now in recruiting high school students. Folks, their parents will drop them off, and so throwing money at something that, in my opinion, doesn't create value commensurate with the cost is not a good plan.
So for every dollar you put into public transportation, you get $4 back into the economy, right? The notion that you brought up, we hear people say it a lot. I'm not going to ride the bus, so I don't want to pay for it. Well, my boss always says that if he never rode a bus, he would still pay for public transit the same way seniors pay for elementary school, the same way we all pay for community college, because the benefit will come back to us. Buses take cars off the road. That means that there's less accidents, that there's less death, that there's less resource on police, fire, EMS, that there's less congestion, that there's more increase in productivity or lower emissions. That means there's access to education, medication, workforce development training, and a whole lot of other things. For every dollar you put into public transit, you get $4 back into the economy, and that ends up resulting in more Imagine theaters.
I do want to talk about the competitiveness aspect of this whole thing, because a lot of people, Amazon basically flat out told us the lack of a cohesive transit system and the lack of regional cooperation was something that they were not appreciating about Detroit's bid. I think a lot of people were shocked we didn't make the top 25, but that was a pretty significant smackdown that we received right there. How do we address that? Because this is something they're looking at.
Well, let's cope with the reality of Amazon. We didn't come up with enough crony capitalism to make them happy. That's really what it boils down to. And they'll make every excuse in the world. We just didn't throw enough money at them. And by the way, I don't have the government throwing money at me to build more theaters. So why are we throwing money at Amazon to bring these jobs?
Well, if I could,
but so basically, you're saying that
it's a red herring.
Reason they gave us was not real.
It's a red herring.
Okay.
So the reason why I take some exception to that, because I've heard other people say this. I'm the one that got the call from Amazon to tell us that we were not going to make the list. And that's because we had, at the county, worked really hard in attracting Amazon in Livonia, really hard in attracting Amazon in Romulus. Both those projects were very, very successful, okay? And what became very clear throughout the process is, incentives are something that people take into account. There's no doubt about it. But it is not the decision-making hierarchy at Amazon to say, because they gave us the most incentives, we're going to go there. What they clearly told me, and then I got 15 other people on the phone. Sandy Baru was on the phone, people from the state, people from Canada, the mayor's office, people that work for Dan Gilbert. They said, listen, talent is an issue, but there is no place in America that can backfill our order of 50,000 people making $100,000 a year. The question really is, do you have the amenities in life that's going to bring people from Chicago, Cleveland, Toronto, Grand Rapids, and bring them here? 25 to 30-year-olds, as he said earlier, they're just putting their keys down. They want to be on their devices to and from work. They want to watch movies. And so to be able to attract that kind of talent, okay, you need a really integrated public transportation system.
Well, I would respectfully submit that they're just flat wrong. The quality of life in Michigan, in my opinion, is second to none. I've lived here all my life. I'm a great example of someone who stayed in Michigan, opened his business in Michigan, grew his entrepreneurial business here. And I've got to tell you, I think that the naysayers or those who want to compare us and say that our amenities are not comparable with other parts of the country are just simply wrong on that basis as well.
But the transit issue is one of those things. There's a great question somebody asked. They asked them the last time they rode a bus here. Nobody rose their hand.
Yeah.
But then they said, when's the last time you took public transit when you were in another city? Oh, everybody raised their hand. And they go to Washington, they go to New York, Boston. You ride the T, you ride the metro, you ride the subway. People utilize it because it's there. Is this one of those things that if we build it, they will come?
Well, again, in my book, we can't make up for the mistakes of the past by instituting technology that doesn't further our efforts in growing mobility here in Southeast Michigan. You know, the other point
You
is...
could make self-driving buses too, though.
Well, that's true. What do you say we start with smaller vehicles first? But in my world, not only will autonomous vehicles help the disabled and the elderly, because who wants to sit in a cold bus shelter waiting for a queue line? And we know the ridership was abysmal during the wintertime. Why? Because it wasn't convenient. Bring those vehicles right to someone's doorstep. Be the leader in mobility in the nation. Let's promote our own.
How about the notion of sort of using that from the place, get you from your door to the transit stop as the way to reach those communities that maybe aren't served by direct lines?
If you look at the Southeast Connect Michigan plan, I mean, we have $20 million annually for core area mobility for the exact problem that both of you were talking about. We do have seniors that can't make it to the bus stop, and so we've got some dial and ride, some door-to-door service involved in that for paratransit services for disabled and the like. The nice thing about this plan is it does take into account the future of technology. There's $20 million annually dedicated for technology to bring the system along for whatever may come. We have last mile service. You know, you're going to go to a bus stop in this plan, and you're going to stop, and it's going to have a kiosk, and it's going to tell you, you know, a countdown of when the next bus is coming. It's going to give you a unified map and a paying system. It's going to have an application for an Uber or a Lyft or a Chariot, and it's going to take you that last mile home. So I would tell you this. As a smart board member, we've got a new service, the fast service, okay? And I was very confident and very instrumental in making sure that service reached the airport, okay? Today, and these buses have Wi-Fi on them, they're much more technologically advanced. On Sundays, this service is up 65%. If you build it, they will come. If you provide the service and you provide it the right way.
Paul Glantz, I have to ask you this question because there has been a very, very heavy push here at the conference on this issue. Are you convinced in any way? Have you been moved by the 220 businesses that came out suggesting that they want to see a unified regional transit system and see this on the ballot?
Well, you know, I was asked to join as well, and I can tell you I've respectfully declined. And I'm a big believer that everyone is entitled to their opinion. I certainly don't take exception with those who believe that the plan as proposed is the right one. I live in a world where we don't do a bad deal just to do a deal. And again, we go back to the cost issue. I'm really very much in favor of subsidizing the elderly, the low-income workers, the disabled. That's great. But why do we need to superimpose another layer of government bureaucracy while we're talking about the fact that it's the only viable plan? What do you say we rationalize government while we're at it?
So if I could speak to that, he's actually exactly right. Right now we've got SMART, we've got DDOT, we've got RTA. The truth is, in the four-county region, there are 140 different municipalities. All of them have line items in their budgets spending something on transit. The beautiful part of the RTA is that it gets rid of the bureaucracy that he's talking about. It's a regional authority. Think about the bureaucracy we're getting rid of, and think of the buying power through economies of scale of how much we can actually provide. Your dollar actually stretches longer. So he brings up an excellent point. We need to have less bureaucracy, one region authority.
Well, as a former government employee, I sort of, bristle a little bit at the notion that government doesn't function at all, but that's okay.
Marginally.
So we got about a minute left here, and I want to give everybody a last shot to woo people to your side. So you get 30 seconds, Paul.
You know, I would simply suggest, Craig, that there is a better opportunity forward, and that is that we should be supporting our mobility initiative. We should be using a 21st century technology. We should be committed to that as the underpinning, the basis for this. Second of all, we should be looking at ways to assess lower costs by providing fewer subsidies to those who don't need subsidies. And with that, I'll turn it over to Khalil for the last word.
You get the last 30 seconds.
I do think you're right. Since the 70s, we've been trying to attack this problem. We've always thought that new technology would come, and here we are still talking about it. I think, look, for less than $10 a month, we can help solve a 40, 50-year problem in our region. And more than anything, here's what I'd ask. We're not even asking for you to promote the plan. We're just asking, let it get on the ballot. Let the people decide.
And we shall see. I appreciate it. Khalil, Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig.
All right.
Khalil.
Thanks, Craig, very much. You know, Dennis, as you know, I'm not originally from Michigan. I came from New York about 14 years ago. This was an issue back then.
It's remained an issue, and it's one that I personally feel we need to address in order to be competitive from a business development and attraction standpoint, and in order to get people to where the jobs are, we really need to invest.
Stu Sandler from Grand River Strategies, a Republican political consulting firm here in Michigan. And at the end is former Congressman Bart Stupak from right here in the 1st District of Michigan. Mr. Stupak is now a lobbyist with VanHulle in Washington, D.C. And so we want to talk a bit about what are the issues related to the Trump era, and we want to kick it off by talking about what Mr. Trump actually tweeted already this morning.
Okay.
So he had 4 things on his mind, looks like,
Yes.
when he woke up this morning. First, he wanted to talk about Samantha Bee, and she said some nasty things about his daughter, Ivanka. He also wanted to reference the economic forecast, which came out shortly after that. He referenced the Russian hoax again and how much the investigation is costing us. And then finally, he said something about our good friends from Canada and maybe considering tariffs on timber and lumber. So what does that do to us when we're waking up to these kinds of things every morning? And Stu, would you like to take that one first?
Sure. And thank you. Thanks for having me. I view this as sort of a revolutionary moment in communication. First of all, I'm surprised to see that we're living in the Trump era. I didn't know it was an era. It's 18 months, but I guess we're in the era now. But I think just like fireside chats with Roosevelt, Trump is changing the way elected officials communicate. Now he has a direct line of communication to the people, and he's using it. And I think the most important thing that you mentioned in that was the economic numbers. If you look at all the regulatory reform that the Trump administration's done, you look at the tax reform that the Republican House and Senate and President Trump put through, we have the lowest unemployment numbers in 18 years. It's phenomenal. 223,000 jobs were added in May. It's at 3.8%. You can't argue with that kind of success. From so many levels, Trump is succeeding. People might not like his style, but you can't argue with the results.
So you think the Trump era so far is going great?
I think it is, and I think what you're seeing too is, Democrats thought initially that they were going to have a lot of success because normally in a midterm, the party that does not have the president really exploits a large advantage. But I think you're seeing it diminish as it goes on because I think people are happy with his results. CNN put out a poll today showing that independents now lean more towards a Republican candidate than a Democrat candidate on generic ballot.
So Bart, you're from an area here that did support President Trump in his election, yet also supported you for many, many years.
Sure.
We're seeing them, I think, continue to be very closely watching what's going on. What do you think? How is this affecting us here?
Well, I think the president has done some good things, but I don't think the fine numbers you see for the economy and all that is due just to Mr. Trump or to the Republican Congress. I think a lot of those basis factors were set by the previous administration. We're seeing the follow-through on it. The tax reform bill, I don't see how it helps average Americans. So I don't think that's such a big success. Does it help the economy? Did it give the economy a boost? Yes, and I'll give him credit for that. Has he deregulated some parts of government that should be? Yes. But at the same time, any other project that the president has ran on really has not come to fruition. And you mentioned it, 4 tweets today. So what are we supposed to focus on? I mean, if you want government to be successful, and if you want the president to be successful, let's focus on some of these issues instead of every day you get 4 tweets, and it's only, 10 o'clock? We'll have a couple more by noon, and by 5 o'clock tonight, he'll disown every tweet. I mean, that's the problem. The uncertainty is not, it's good for my business, but it is not good for the country.
Well, to follow up on the tweets a bit, I'll continue with you, Bart. One of them was about our good friends in Canada. Yeah. And in Michigan, we know how much we rely on that relationship with Canada, where it might be different.
Largest trading partnership in the world is Michigan and Canada.
Yeah.
Now, what are these tariffs going to do to our economy? I think it's really going to hurt Michigan. And I know many of the Republican members they begged them not to do it. So, I mean, he says he wants to renegotiate NAFTA. To negotiate, you need 2 people. You need 2 parties at the table. Right now, we only have 1. And the rhetoric that he's putting forth and the tariffs he's putting forth does not help that discussion at all. And I hope we could have a discussion and not a tweet war on tariffs and other things that should be addressed.
I think you look at what Trump is doing, and it's been masterful how he's relating to other countries. The fact that he's trying to negotiate from a position of strength that for so many years there's been a unilateral trade war directed against the United States, where we've lost, where we've imported more than we've exported, and we've basically been on the wrong side of it. And frankly, what President Trump is doing is negotiating from a level of strength, and he's getting countries to come to the table and negotiate for more fairer for job creators and for American workers. And I think it's actually working. And all you have to do from an international perspective is look at what's going on with North Korea. For decades, that problem stymied the United States government, where presidents gave the North Koreans, concession after concession after concession, and never got anything out of it. Now you have actually Kim Jong-un coming to the table because President Trump is negotiating from a position of strength. And when people get caught up in the tweets, I think this president, unrelated to kind of how he's very focused. His administration is very focused. He puts out a lot of clutter that get all sorts of people sort of chasing it. All the talking heads chase it in the other direction. But if you look at what this administration is doing, it's been methodical.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. We heard more than one session earlier this week refer to the sort of so what factor, right? He's putting out these tweets, it's antagonizing people, but it's taking the eye off the ball of what is really in his agenda one way or another. I mean, do you think that's intentional?
I do. I think this, he's messing. Like, I grew up in New York, so I've had 30 years of Trump before he became a politician. I saw how he dealt with the New York media. It was masterful, and frankly, they were a lot tougher on him than the Washington press corps is. I mean, this is kind of child's play when he deals with the Washington press corps, because he had 30 years of dealing with a really hardcore New York press that was very antagonistic. He was on the front page of the New York Daily News, Newsday, every single day, all these sort of headlines. He's used to this, and I think what he's gotten the DC press corps to do is to chase the ball one way while he goes the other, and I think he's very successful at it.
Mm-hmm. So what about these attacks on the media? So one of the tweets this morning was just that. Now, you can argue whether it was fair or not, but it's certainly a theme he likes to use.
Well, but I mean, when you get in an argument with somebody, what Samantha Bede said was totally wrong, should be condemned, but it just gives you an indication of how he's operating as the President of the United States, which I think is beneath the office, beneath the individual. He should not be. You can have arguments with people, but when you do, leave them with their dignity. You don't need to rip and destroy everything. You talk about the trade deals. We blame other countries because they took advantage of us. It was the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives that agreed to those trade deals. So yes, should they be renegotiated? Should it be fair? Sure, but I don't think you can blame other countries for us agreeing to a trade agreement. So when you get to NAFTA and all that, let's go back and revisit it. But if you don't get your own way, don't start poking people in the eye, and that's unfortunately what this president does.
But I think that's exactly the point about let's revisit NAFTA. NAFTA is over 20 years old. Sure. Frankly, there are parts of NAFTA that do not benefit the United States. I think the president is making a point. Let's renegotiate this. Let's look into this. Let's see what problems that the United States have that can be resolved, and let's do it from a position of strength. And I think he's been pretty masterful at getting the benefits from it.
Well, I think his position of strength in this one is actually going to hurt Michigan, hurt our economy, and actually hurt this country.
Well, we'll see. But for right now, what the empirical data says is it's actually helping.
Well, it's just started today. I don't know how it can be helping when it just started today. So I mean, let's give it a little time. Look, again, going back to NAFTA, in order to have an agreement, you need two sides, and there has to be a mutual agreement and Canada said we don't want to negotiate NAFTA. We like it. Mexico's basically same thing. Of course, you can't get Mexico to the table because he keeps saying he's going to build this wall and they're going to pay for it, which isn't going to happen. So I mean, the president, he's a master at distraction. I'll give you that. But there are serious issues that need serious discussions, and a tweet just doesn't make it. And I wish he would grow into the job. And I don't mean he has to be docile, but sure. Be more respectful of people and civility that we talked a lot about up here at this conference. I wish he would extend that to his activities and his presidency.
But what's interesting, Congressman, and I think you were from this area. You served this area with great distinction over the years. I think if you talk to the constituents of this area, you look at the support and approval he has, he's probably at 65%, 75% approval here. I mean, this district now has become, and I read the piece he wrote last July about how the Democratic Party is becoming more closed to different voices, and that people like you might not be able to serve anymore as an elected official because of certain positions you take. You look at someone like Trump, who people of this area relate to. They actually like the way he communicates. I think if you talk to them, they finally feel like a president is talking to them directly.
Oh, I talk to him all the time. I still live here. I leave here, I'll go to Escanaba and Menominee where I live. And I disagree with you. They may support his policies. They do not like his rhetoric. They do not like the way he talks. They do not like the undignified way he conducts himself. Now, does that mean they're going to vote against him or throw him out or something? No. But if everyone you talk to, they'd say, can't he just tone it down a little bit? Can't we just be more respectful of each other? Can't we bring some civility to this discussion?
So in the few minutes we have left, I wanted to jump to the next thing, or maybe the last thing, which is this November election coming up. And, you know, to Trump or not to Trump, right? In the election, we've seen Attorney General Bill Schuette, as he's running for governor, really embracing President Trump. We've seen others less so, and we've seen many Democrats running against President Trump. What do you recommend to your friends right now running?
I've recommended from the time he got the nomination to embrace him. He's the Republican nominee. He's the Republican leader of the party. You will be the Trump candidate as a Republican, whether you embrace him or not. And frankly, I think Republicans support him overwhelmingly. Look at Bill Schuette's lead in the primary. It is based on the fact, partially, that he has the Trump endorsement. He's also a great candidate, but the Trump endorsement has certainly helped solidify that lead. Beyond that, you look at the numbers in Michigan. Donald Trump's numbers in Michigan right now are better than they were in October 2016. I think he has a very strong base in Michigan. I went to the Washington Township rally in Macomb County, where you have the home of the Reagan Democrats. It was a massive turnout and a massive amount of support. I think Republicans are going to do very well this cycle.
As a Democrat, I would ignore Trump. Just ignore him. I mean, when I ran up here, I didn't bring in all kinds of national leaders. You have to run on your own party, your own agenda. You know, what are the issues that are important to you? What's important to Northern Michigan? Jobs, the economy, things like this. That's what you run on. Just ignore the president. And you're the person who's on the ballot, not the president. So tell people what you're going to do for them. Ignore the president. He's going to be a distraction anyways. Just ignore it. Do your own job. Do your job, and you'll be okay in politics. And I would predict that if the election was today, Trump would lose Michigan.
To Bernie Sanders or to Elizabeth Warren?
Probably to someone like Tim Ryan from Ohio. I think our party's going to swing back. You're not going to have a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren as our nominee. Maybe a Mark Warner out of Virginia. Something like that.
I mean, it's interesting to watch the division in the Democratic Party. People talk about the division in the Republican Party, but you take a look at this last Democratic State Convention, there were a lot of divisiveness, there was a lot of fraying, and frankly, there's a lot of division, and I've talked to a lot of Democrats up here, that has not been repaired.
But see, Stu, like I've always said, you know, I don't belong to an organized party. I'm a Democrat, okay? And Will Rogers is the one who said that many years ago, and he's still correct today. You know, I don't belong to an organized party. I'm a Democrat. So
you're an outlier.
I'm an outlier, maybe. Yeah.
Well, I guess last thing is we have just a minute left to do. How is this affecting your office politics? I mean, we know kind of your backgrounds, but are people really talking about Trump in your office, or are you trying to kind of leave that aside and focus on the work to be done?
I'm a Republican consulting firm. Yes, we're talking about him. I mean, you know, there is a lot of sort of people who get really caught up and really sort of worked up about it. But I do think that we're having important conversations, and I do, you know, this country has always been built on high levels of, you know, real parties going at it. I mean, nobody's dying in the streets, so you know, over politics, so that's a good thing right now. But you know, yeah, it's a high level of discourse, but I think it's important discussions.
My main office is Washington, D.C., and of course, Washington, D.C., that's all you do is talk politics. But from a business point of view, President Trump's been good for business because clients do not know what's going to happen. They'll come in and say, help us understand what's going to happen. What will the House Republicans do? What will the Democrats do? We don't know what the president's going to do. Give us more options. So it's a constant discussion, this administration, what the president's going to tweet next or what he's going to do next. And all you can do is try to give them many ideas, different avenues this policy may take.
We need to wrap it up there, so I think that's going to be the last comment. Thank you, Bart Stupak, Stu Sandler, for your participation today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sarah.
Nice job, Sarah. Thank you so much. We're almost done.
Almost done. Time to hit the road.
Almost just flew by. So our last segment will be one that I think everyone agrees with and just doesn't know how to get done. And I think we heard a nice little trending comment last night at the governor.
Fix the damn road.
Right. And, no one disagrees. We have an infrastructure problem. We need to fix our roads. We just need to figure out how to pay for it.
Yeah, I think in talking about the last panel talked about President Trump, one of the things that he has stressed is investment in infrastructure.
Right.
And so we'll see how that pans out. I look very much forward to this morning's panel. I've got my dear friends
Hey,
up
Charlie.
here. Good morning, Charlie. What's happening?
Wow, good morning. Man, you guys look great today,
Save
don't
the best
you?
for last.
Hey, Charlie.
Woo, look at that. Oh, well, I'll tell you what, we do it right now? Are we on? We ready? Let's do it. All right, roads. Well, that is a great topic because it's a political topic. It's an economic topic. It may be arguably the most divisive topic, perhaps, in this upcoming election. Joining me here, Dennis Muchmore with Honigman Law. Good to have you. And Dave Woodward, Oakland County Commissioner, former member of the State House, I believe. All kinds of stuff there. Okay. Fix the damn roads. Not my line. Gretchen Whitmer. First question last night at the gubernatorial debate. And that was the response was fix the damn roads. How political is this road fix, Dave Woodward?
Well, I think if you ask anyone across this state, regardless of their partisan leanings, what have you, they saw this. When spring kind of came to Michigan, they saw. You ask any tire shop, repair shop, this was the worst season ever. People want solutions to this. They're tired of the rhetoric. We've got to get to the fixing, which is going to require resources, and discuss it any other way. So I actually don't think it's a partisan issue. You have to have bold leadership willing to take on what is a monumental task. It's going to take billions with a B to fix this problem. You got to be willing to do it.
I can't believe Dave Woodward, a Democrat, said it's not a political issue. Let me say maybe, Dennis, arguably the Democrats may say that the Republicans have been in office in the legislature and have had the governor's office for 8 years, and the roads are still bad. Could this be a good political issue for Democrats?
Well, I think it's always a good political issue, and as you're familiar, Michael Patrick Shields is always willing to remind me that J.P. McCarthy used to say, it's not the money, it's the amount. And I never forgot that, because you can't fix the roads without money, and you can't generate money in the system we're operating under. So if you're gonna fix the roads, you've got to do it with a certain amount of money. I firmly believe we're doing it the wrong way, and that we need, number one, priority road design, so that we figure out which roads need to be replaced first. Number two, we need to go to bonding, and we need to raise the sales tax. I'd say 1 cent or 2. What you pick it? You pick whatever number you want. People aren't going to want to do it, but you need to use the sales tax because it has an inflationary benefit. So then you go bond for X dollars on the first priority set that you have, and you use your 1% to pay for those, and everybody knows which roads are going to get fixed with that 1%, and they know what they're voting for.
But didn't we just have a proposal where we were going to raise the sales tax to pay for roads? And if I remember correctly, it was voted down by 80%.
Well, if you make something so complicated that no one understands what it is, you're going to have problems passing it, and that's the Christmas tree effect of going through 20 people in a committee to put something together. It doesn't work. You just got to pick on something simple, because people are saying, I want this fixed, and I don't know how much it's going to cost. Nobody really does. You can pick a number, I don't care, whatever it is. But you got to say, these are my priorities. I'm going to take this money. I'm going to bond for it. I'm going to use this money. We have the best MDOT director in the country, probably the best Department of Transportation director in the entire country. And he works at this every day. And people are constantly coming up with political solutions. It's not a political solution.
It's not. Well, from a framework perspective, again, this is a math problem. It costs this much to do it. We turn to the engineers, we turn to the experts, figure out what it is, and then we've got to build a plan that fixes it. You throw if we, over the last 20 years, the reality is if we treated our homes like we treat our roads, we'd be condemned. They're in such deplorable condition. Just in Oakland County, about 10 years ago, 70% of our roads were in fair or good condition. Today, 70% of our roads are in poor or deplorable condition. And so you need a fundamental framework to approach this. You can't have a Christmas tree approach to funding. You need a reliable, stable fund of resources, getting to what Dennis is talking about, so that you can bond out to be able to fix the roads, and you have to have enough revenue coming in to maintain those roads. You've got to be able to make certain that it's equitable, so that that everyone pays their fair share. That's our friends in business and the people of Michigan paying their fair share to fix these things. And probably the thing that's most important, you want it to be reliable and stable and easy to understand, simple. So that 100% of the money that's raised from a proposal goes to fixing those roads.
So I think there is an issue as to how much roads cost, or how much would it cost. And if we're doing a campaign to bond, which I kind of have one of my questions would be bond, because I think that is probably the way to go. I'm just wondering if cities or counties can bond on their own, maybe a state issue. Hold that thought for a moment. If we just look at the candidates in this election, $1.2 billion has already been allocated, so there will be money. And some of the candidates, Lieutenant Governor Brian Kelly's talking about that, Bill Schuette's talking about that. Don't need anything else. We've got it here. If you look to the opposite extreme, Sri Thanadar, I believe, was $4 to $6 billion needed. Gretchen Whitmer, $3 billion. So where are we? And if we don't know the number, or if there's that much of a discrepancy in the amount needed to fix Michigan's roads, politically, it's disastrous, isn't it?
Well, it may be disastrous, but the number is whatever you decide you're going to spend. Because if you look at the freeways in Detroit, they flood sometimes underneath the freeway. That's because the pumping system that MDOT installs under that can't keep up with the floodwaters because of the runoff that goes down the highway and goes down into those, where you go underneath those bridges where those pumping systems are. And so you can pick any number you want to pick. I can find something to spend it on. The question is, what am I going to spend it on? If I go to the public and I say to them, I want X dollars for these roads, and I'm a voter, I'm sitting there saying to myself, okay, I'll do that. I'll make that trade, or I won't make that trade based on the roads that you're going to prioritize to be fixed. And I just think, we have to get very sensible about that. We put a lot of money into roads as it is, but we don't bond as much as we used to. And if you bond, then you dedicate X resources specifically for that and specifically prioritize.
So, under the much more initiative.
Well, thank you.
which is interesting. Help me out, former legislator Dave Woodward. If we dedicate money for a particular road, Mound Road in Macomb County, Woodward on Woodward Avenue, name for your family, is that what I understand?
Something like that.
All right. Does that run afoul of Public Act 51?
Oh, you want to talk about Public Act 51 in our segment?
Well, but the idea, the concept, and I'm going to generalize 51 because it's very complicated, but basically you have to treat, everybody gets a share equally.
Right.
Is that a problem?
Yeah, well, I guess I come back to what Dennis was talking about. I actually think that we have a general sense. I think there is a consensus. We probably need to double the amount of investment in our roads every year, at least for the next decade, to fix them and get into a position so that we can repair them at a way to increase their duration. So with that, I would like to turn to the experts. There's a lot of things I disagree with Governor Snyder over the years. I actually think I'm in agreement about how much this is going to take to be able to do. And then you build a plan that dedicates the money. The proposal that was on the ballot was a travesty in terms of confusion and things going in all different directions. Dollars raised need to go directly into roads and empower our experts to be able to figure out how to fix the most dangerous ones first. And then we'll fix them all using the mechanics that we currently have.
So do you think voters would agree to raise taxes to fix roads?
Yes. And what's happened, because over the last decade or two, that we haven't actually kept up, the state hasn't kept up its deal of the bargain, local communities have been. At Oakland County and Oakland County government, roads isn't our primary responsibility. We have road commissions, but we are putting increasingly more and more money into roads because we've got to help our local cities and others do it. We talked at this conference, importance of cities to invest in all those things. And so the reality is the answer is yes. Voters do support it, will support it, if they fundamentally believe this will fix the problem and it will, and all the money that would be generated will go to those roads.
You agree with that?
Well, I'm a believer that the public is a lot smarter than they get credit for. And if they think they're getting a fair deal, they'll do whatever whatever is presented to them. If they think it's fair, if they know what it's going for, if they know how it's applied. I mean, my whole point with the idea of prioritizing road construction and using bonding to cover it.
The much more proposal.
Yeah, is that
much more?
Is that you,
much more.
It's really that you can actually dedicate these resources and say, we're going to take this money, whether it's a legislative distribution or whether it's a sales tax, whatever you want to do, we're going to actually apply this to this, and this will fix these problems.
So let me offer an amendment to the much more proposal.
Oh, good.
Could a local county or city say, forget the state because of all the red tape and we don't trust it, and just do a bonding proposal? I don't know if this is legal now. I'd have to look at the Honickman law firm and see if it is. But assuming it is, why can't Oakland County, for example, just do a bonding proposal dedicated to fix Oakland County roads, dedicated roads, and that would be money that it's easy to meet. Is that legal? Could you do that?
Well, I think you can do anything that you can. Al Cropsey was sitting over here, and he would tell you that you can do anything that you can figure out how to do. And I think you can do that. Yeah. It's really.
We just solved the road problem. This is Mackinac Policy Conference, what we want to do. A much more proposal with an amendment.
We do not want 83 individual strategies to fix these roads. I mean, the reality is that our entire state's economy, the safety of our roads rests. I mean, the state has a very key role in this. I think local communities have been trying to step in to fill the void when leadership hasn't stepped forward. I mean, there are political realities we have to get through. But if you're honest with people, this is what it's going to cost. And get to that. This is what it's going to cost to do the following things. I fundamentally do believe that people will support it. And if we make some cost sharing to do that, let's put that on the table to figure it out.
Maybe the state can guarantee the bonds. I don't know if that's possible.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be great.
I think they can. I mean, state bonds are highly rated. The Department of Transportation's never defaulted on a bond. And I keep saying, Kirk Stiles was a tremendous director, and he's nationally recognized. He was president of the National Association, and he's been through 2 administrations. And they were a different kind of administration. So you can do this stuff. It's just a will.
We have a couple more minutes left.
Okay.
Where do we go next year? Are we still going to be talking about roads, do you think?
Well, I think we're going to be talking about as long as we live in the northern climate. You know, if we want to pick ourselves up and move to Florida, I mean, we might get away from it, but we're always, the problem is our road base has to go down further. So we really have to rip up these highways, and we have to lower the base in order to deal with the drainage issues. We don't have enough road base, and so each year the deterioration causes the cracks, causes the potholes. So if you're going to do it, you got to rip out the roads and you got to lower the base down, because the base is what makes the road stable for a longer period of time.
I would say that if we don't elect new leadership in the state, in the legislature and the governor's office that's committed to doubling funding for our roads, and the much more plan or other, if we don't seriously do that, by the time we're here next year, then the answer is yes, because we're not going to fix the problem. And here's the reality. It will be worse next year than this year.
The bottom line is we are going to have more money to fix the road.
Absolutely.
It's just
everyone
an
agrees with that.
We have to have. That we can all agree with. Dennis Muchmore with a much more plan. You heard it right here.
Yeah, thank you.
Policy conference right here. Dedicated funding for roads and a bond issue. How about that?
Well, it's the Dennis Archer for Governor campaign plank that I'm advocating here. So.
And there's your platform, whatever you're going to run for next time. How about that?
All right.
Dave Woodward of Woodward Avenue. Sounds good. You guys, thanks
Charlie.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Charlie, you got to come out of your shell a little bit. We got to get you some coffee.
I don't know where he gets all the energy from.
So much energy.
I haven't had any coffee yet today, actually.
Who's driving home with you?
I don't know.
Charlie, what about a Let It Rip live from the island?
I would love to do that.
2019.
Now we're talking. That would be good. This road issue could be good.
Yeah.
A lot of ways to skin that cat. Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much. This is a phenomenal panel. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Much more planned.
Much more planned. You heard it right here.
Well, it's our second year doing this. It is so much fun, Dennis. I love working with you.
This is fantastic.
It's so much fun. And thanks to everyone who joined us. Thanks to everybody who's watching at home. All of our friends here in the Grand Hotel Parlor, one of the most beautiful places in the world.
Yeah, they do a phenomenal job here. I mean, the family runs a phenomenal property. We're so happy that they have us up here every year. Dan is very hospitable. Love seeing him every year coming up. Yeah. And we wish everyone a safe drive back home. And for those of you who are at home, we're coming back down.
Right, and thanks to our friends from DPTV for all they do to make this conference available to everyone else out there outside.
Yeah, thank you.